If you pull $20,000 out of your 401k this year, the IRS can tax you as if you actually made $37,000. That's not a mistake on your return. It's a mechanism built into the tax code, and almost nobody explains it until after the withdrawal is already made. It's called the Social Security tax torpedo, and here's the shape of it. Once you start drawing Social Security, every dollar you pull from a 401k can drag a portion of that Social Security check out of tax-free territory and into taxable territory. $1 of ordinary withdrawal ends up pulling almost another dollar of income right behind it. Most retirement guidance tells you to delay Social Security until 70 and live off your 401k in the meantime. That advice assumes you have a separate brokerage account sitting there to bridge the gap. But 70% of retirees don't have one. They only have a 401k and a Social Security check, and for that group, draining the 401k first can trigger the exact mechanism we just talked about, year after year. By the end of this video, I'm going to show you why taking Social Security at 62, the exact opposite of what you've probably heard, can actually protect your lifetime tax bill instead of hurting it. We'll call it the Flip the Script order, built specifically for people without a brokerage account standing between them and retirement. If you're 55 to 65 and you're tired of feeling like the tax code is waiting to take a bigger bite out of your 401k than it needs to, stick around. This channel looks at the math most retirement advice skips over. Subscribe to WES Investor if that sounds like your kind of channel. There's a number that surprises almost every retiree the first time they see it. Pull $20,000 from a 401k while collecting Social Security, and depending on your bracket, the IRS can tax you at an effective rate of 40.7% on that withdrawal. Not the 22% bracket you thought you were sitting in. 40.7%. The reason is something called provisional income. The IRS adds up your regular income, any tax-exempt interest, and half of your Social Security check, and uses that total to decide how much of your Social Security gets taxed. Cross $44,000 in provisional income as a married couple, and up to 85% of your Social Security becomes taxable, on top of whatever you pulled from the 401k. And that 85% figure does something most people don't expect. It doesn't just apply to income above the line. It can pull Social Security that was already sitting there, tax-free, back into the taxable column, dollar for dollar, right alongside whatever you withdrew. Picture a couple with $40,000 a year in Social Security. On its own, most of that would sit below the taxable line. Now they pull $20,000 from a 401k to cover expenses. That withdrawal doesn't just add $20,000 to their tax return. It drags roughly $17,000 of their Social Security into taxable territory right along with it. So instead of being taxed on $20,000, they're being taxed on close to $37,000. Spend $20,000, get taxed on $37,000. That's the ghost in the math nobody shows you on a retirement calculator. Run that same withdrawal through a couple already sitting in the 22% bracket, and the extra Social Security dragged along pushes the effective rate on that $20,000 withdrawal up to 40.7%. Nearly double what the bracket hit number on paper suggests. This is why the standard delay to 70 advice quietly favors draining a 401k first. Every dollar that comes out of a 401k is fully taxable already, and forcing you to lean on it earlier means more of your working life savings gets pulled through this exact mechanism while you wait for a bigger check. The trade-off nobody names out loud is that a bigger future Social Security check is being paid for with a smaller, more heavily taxed 401k today. I've watched this happen to people who did everything right. They saved diligently for 30 years, followed the delay to 70 advice because it sounded conservative, and then got blindsided by a tax bill on income they never expected to be taxed twice. And this isn't even the whole tax story. There's a second bill hiding behind the first one, tied to Medicare, and it can cost you thousands more a year if you don't see it coming. There's a second bill waiting behind the first one, and it doesn't come from the IRS. It comes from Medicare. Once your income crosses a certain line, the government adds a surcharge onto your Part B premium, and that line is closer than most people think. In 2026, the standard Part B premium sits $202.90 a month. Cross $109,000 in income as a single filer, or $218,000 as a married couple, and Medicare tax on what's called IRMAA, an income-related surcharge that can push your monthly premium as high as $689.90, depending on how far over the line you land. This connects back to the 401k withdrawal you just made in a way that isn't obvious at first. IRMAA doesn't look at your tax bracket. It looks at your total income, close to the same modified income figure that pulled your Social Security into the taxable column. So a 401k withdrawal timed around delaying Social Security can do double duty against you, dragging Social Security into taxable income and pushing your Medicare premium into a higher tier in the same year. This is why it helps to stop thinking of your 401k and your Social Security check as two separate accounts. Think of them as one taxable bucket. Every dollar that comes out of either one fills that same bucket, and once it's full, the next dollar gets taxed at a higher rate and can trip the Medicare surcharge right along with it. There is a piece of relief working in the other direction that most retirement advice hasn't caught up to yet. Starting with the 2025 tax year, retirees 65 and older get an extra $6,000 deduction each, $12,000 for a married couple, on top of the standard deduction. It phases out above $75,000 in income for a single filer and $150,000 for a couple. But for most people living on a 401k and Social Security, it's real room that wasn't there before. I used to tell people to wait until 70, no exceptions. I was a delay zealot, honestly. But once I sat down with the 2026 IRMAA brackets and the new senior deduction side by side, it became clear that for someone relying only on a 401k, waiting can end up costing more than it saves. So if the standard order is broken for most people, what replaces it? It starts with a number a lot of people are scared to say out loud: age 62. Here's the flip. Instead of following the standard order, delay Social Security, drain the 401k first, we flip it. Take Social Security at 62 and let the 401k sit as untouched as possible. Yes, that costs you something. Waiting adds up through two different boosts, a reduction that disappears once you reach full retirement age at 67, and delayed retirement credits worth roughly 8% a year after that, all the way to 70. Give that up by claiming at 62, and your monthly check is smaller for the rest of your life. That's real, and I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But the 401k you're protecting, by not touching it, doesn't sit still either. It keeps growing, keeps compounding, and it does that without triggering the tax torpedo or the Medicare surcharge we just walked through, because untouched money in a 401k isn't counted as income yet. Picture two versions of the same retirement. In the first, you delay Social Security to 70 and pull $300,000 out of a $500,000 401k over those 8 years just to live. By 70, your Social Security check is bigger, but your 401k is half gone, and you don't have much cushion left if something goes wrong. In the second version, you take Social Security at 62. That check covers most of your baseline expenses, so you only pull something small from the 401k, maybe $5,000 a year, just to round things out. The rest of the account keeps compounding through those years instead of shrinking. Run the numbers on that second path. A $500,000 401k growing at 6% a year for 8 years, without heavy withdrawals pulling against it, grows to somewhere close to $800,000. That's an extra $300,000 in principal sitting there, money you control, versus a Social Security check that's a few $100s higher each month, but locked in exactly as is. None of this means the 401k grows forever without consequences. Once you turn 73, the IRS requires you to start taking money out whether you need it or not, through required minimum distributions. A larger, more patiently grown 401k means larger required withdrawals down the road. The goal isn't to avoid touching the account forever. It's to control when and how much comes out, instead of being forced into large withdrawals during the exact years the tax torpedo and IRMAA are already working against you. A bigger check feels safer on paper, but money you control gives you options a fixed check never will, a way to cover an emergency, a bad market year, a medical bill, without selling anything at the wrong time. But there's a piece of recent news that changes this math even further for a specific group of retirees, people with a pension. And most of them have no idea it happened. If you spent part of your career in a job that didn't pay into Social Security, a teacher, a police officer, certain government roles, and you also collect a pension, this next part is for you. Until recently, 2 rules called the windfall elimination. Provision and the government pension offset would shrink or sometimes wipe out your Social Security check if you also collected a pension from that kind of job. In January 2025, the Social Security Fairness Act repealed both of them. If you haven't checked your benefit estimate since then, it's worth doing because the number may be higher than what you remember. That repeal means a lot of retirees are now collecting a full pension and a full Social Security check at the same time, something that simply wasn't true for them before. It sounds like good news, and it is, but it also changes the tax math we've been walking through. Here's the piece people miss. The average person collecting Social Security today lives into their mid-80s. The break-even point, where delaying to 70 finally catches up to claiming at 62 in terms of total dollars received, usually lands around age 82. That's a long time to wait for a strategy to pay off, especially if the years in between get taxed at a higher rate than expected. It matters even more once a pension enters the picture, because a pension changes when those higher tax rates start to bite. If you now have a pension and a full Social Security check landing every month, your baseline income, your tax floor, is already higher than it used to be. That means any 401k withdrawal on top of it starts from a higher point on the tax ladder. The same $20,000 withdrawal that costs one retiree 22% can cost a pension holder more, simply because they're starting further up the scale. Now let's stress test all of this against something nobody can control. What happens to this plan if the market drops right when you need the money most? Let's put this in a real situation. Gary and Linda are 62. They've got $600,000 in a 401k and no other savings to speak of. which describes a lot of retirees, not just this couple. Say the market drops 20% right as they retire. If they're following the standard advice, delay Social Security, live off the 401k, they don't have much choice. They have to sell shares to cover groceries and bills, and they're selling them while the account is down. That's called sequence of returns risk, and it's one of the most damaging things that can happen early in retirement, because money pulled out during a downturn never gets the chance to recover. It's the same reason a bad first year in retirement tends to matter more than a bad year 10 years in. The shares sold early are gone. They don't get to participate in the recovery that follows, and that gap follows the account for the rest of its life. Now picture the flip. Gary and Linda take Social Security at 62 instead. That check covers most of their baseline costs. They don't have to sell a single share of the 401k during the crash. The account sits there, down for a while, and then recovers the way markets tend to over time. Run that forward into their 70s, and the couple who didn't have to sell during the downturn ends up with roughly $150,000 more than the couple who followed the standard order and sold low just to get by. I remember a client who checked the S&P 500 every night because he was terrified his 401k wouldn't last until his 70th birthday. That's not retirement. That's a second job, one with no paycheck and no time off. Once you see how this plays out under real pressure, the next question is simple. What do you actually do with this, starting now? So what do you actually do with this? 3 steps, and none of them require guessing. First, work out your provisional income. Add your other income, any tax-exempt interest, and half of your Social Security check together. Social Security itself is getting a 2.8% cost of living increase in 2026, so that number is worth recalculating even if you already ran it last year. Second, use the extra deduction that came with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. If you're 65 or older, you get $6,000 off your taxable income, $12,000 for a married couple, as long as your income stays under roughly $150,000 for a couple. Structure your withdrawals so you stay under that phase-out line instead of stumbling over it by accident. Third, if you don't have a brokerage account outside your 401k, let Social Security cover your baseline expenses first. That protects your 401k principal from being sold off during a bad market year, which is exactly the risk Gary and Linda avoided. That single choice, Social Security first, 401k second, is the difference between selling low out of necessity and selling on your own schedule, years later, once the account has had time to recover. None of this requires predicting the market or guessing at future tax law. It just means knowing your own numbers ahead of time, instead of discovering the tax torpedo on the 1099 that shows up the following spring. There's one more thing standing in the way, and it's not math, it's a feeling. Why does taking Social Security early feel like losing, even when the numbers say otherwise? Part of this is pure math, but part of it is psychology, and it's worth naming directly. Giving up that roughly 8% a year in delayed credits feels like losing. It feels like leaving money sitting on the table, like the government wins the moment you claim early. That feeling is normal. Nobody wants to feel like they made the wrong call on something this permanent. It's a completely human reaction. But look at where the actual win is happening. The government doesn't win when you claim at 62. It wins when you delay, because delaying is exactly what forces you to drain a fully taxable 401k during the years in between, running that money through the tax torpedo we talked about earlier, at rates as high as 40.7%. Claiming at 62 isn't losing 8%. It's closer to buying insurance for your 401k, protecting the part of your savings that's the most expensive to touch. Once you see it that way, the decision stops being about who wins and starts being about which asset you'd rather protect: a slightly bigger check locked in for life, or a 401k still large enough to give you room to breathe. The standard order: delay Social Security to 70. Drain the 401k first. Works fine if you've got a brokerage account sitting there as a bridge. For everyone else, the flip the script order: claim Social Security early and protect the 401k, tends to hold up better against taxes, against Medicare surcharges, and against a bad market showing up at the wrong time. Every retirement looks a little different, but the math behind it doesn't have to stay a mystery. You worked 40 years to build what's sitting in that account. Don't let a rule written for someone else's balance sheet decide how you spend it down. That's the whole point of walking through the math like this. So the decision is yours, made with open eyes instead of borrowed advice. If this made more sense to you than what you've heard elsewhere, subscribe to Wes Investor. We'll keep looking at the parts of retirement planning the standard advice tends to skip.